Welcome to Church and State with Dave Pellowe. I'm talking with Andrew Cooper from LibertyWorks. Now, the question is being put to the Australian population, should we redefine marriage? What do you say?
I say something different. I think that this whole issue of the Marriage Act and redefining it regularly exposes one of the fundamental weaknesses of having government involved in these sorts of areas. And I don't know whether you've noticed, but I don't like government involved in my life. David?
No, nor do I.
No, and so I would like people to, in answering that question, I'd like to imagine a society where there was no Marriage Act. Imagine a society that had marriages that didn't involve government. And let's face it, I mean, when you got married, it's between you and your wife and perhaps the extended families. And I'm sure in your case, it was probably your God was involved. I'm sure at no point did you go, what about government? What can we do for government? You know, we should get them involved. You get them invited along. Government's totally unnecessary. They shouldn't be involved in your marriage. And the reality is they're not involved in your marriage. Now, your church should have control, or should be the only one that you voluntarily cede control to over.
Because I cede it.
That's right, you cede it, so it's voluntary.
Yeah.
And that should go to your church.
Yeah.
Now,
and for someone who doesn't care about religion, they can whatever.
Or they can go to another church that has different rules or different, different views on marriage, but it's all voluntary.
And that wouldn't hurt your feelings?
That wouldn't hurt my feelings because you know what? Back then it didn't hurt anyone's feelings back then. Now, marriage is essentially
personal responsibility instead of government attributed rights.
Exactly. That's a nice, neat way to say it.
Well, look, so I agree with you so much on this one, well, more than one point, but on this point in particular, I'll put it this way. Who gave the government the power to give you dignity? Are you kidding? You lack dignity unless the government affirms you? What a horrible way to view yourself.
It is, and I think that's that. So this issue, I think, for a lot of people is incredibly heated, but I look at it, the reason it's heated is not because the two sides are necessarily evil. Well, they look at each other as evil, but it's not. I look at it and I say, what you've got here is you've got a third party, government has inserted itself into something that they have no right being involved in and aren't even necessarily that welcome in it.
That's right.
And what they've done through regulation is that they've given certain rights that already existed in any case to some group, and for the other groups, they believe that they've been denied certain rights. In my view, if government was removed from marriage, everything would settle down. The churches would be able to marry the people that want to get married in those churches. The people that didn't want to get married in those churches, they could go elsewhere. The people that did want to get married in those churches and weren't viewed as being, I guess, participants in that church. The churches under our libertarian property rights philosophy would be quite within their rights to say, you know what, we don't want you in this church because we don't think you're leading the life that would necessarily reflect the values of our church. You need to go down to the one down the road or find someone else to marry you. And under this arrangement, essentially, most libertarians believe that individuals who should be able to lead their life however they want, as long as they extend the same right to everyone else, individuals should be able to marry each other, consenting adults.
Sure.
Now, that would also mean that gay couples, same-sex couples, would be able to get married somewhere.
Yep.
Perhaps, at a stretch, the government might maintain a register, but there are plenty of examples of private organisations being able to maintain a marriage register. That wouldn't offend the churches, I wouldn't imagine, because the churches are saying no to them. It's not their domain. But it may offend some who see government as being the rightful keeper of marriage, and changing to a situation where...
I don't know who sees government as the rightful keeper of marriage.
Well, it seems to me that there is a contest going on at the moment, and that is who can grab the controls of government and wield marriage into the direction that they want it.
I'll tell you the objection I have to the government redefining marriage, and they are many, so I don't want to be held to only this.
Yeah.
But when the government legislates something, it's quite often the only reference a lot of people have to the boundary between right and wrong, between good and bad, healthy and unhealthy, helpful and unhelpful. Now, homosexuality is not illegal. Nobody's telling people what they can and can't do, and that was rightfully revoked. I would subscribe to the libertarian perspective that what someone does in their home is nobody else's business if it's not hurting anybody else or touching anybody else's property. But when that view is sought to be imposed upon the entire nation, and it is the imposition that's being sought. I'm accused, by defending traditional marriage, of seeking to impose my views on others. Well, it's simply back to front. Like, I'm actually supporting the status quo. I'm actually saying, hang on, it's a different view that you're wanting to impose on the entire nation. You want us all to agree that there is no difference between a heterosexual and a homosexual relationship. And I would say there's no difference between a heterosexual and a homosexual person in their validity and equality and dignity before the law, but it's manifestly untrue to say those relationships are identical and equal.
What relationships are identical and equal?
Exactly.
I can understand your point. So the reason I start my answer was imagine a time or a society without legislation.
MP said that to me a couple of years ago, and I thought that is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. But my resistance is wearing down. I'm open to thinking, maybe the government should get out of marriage altogether, not to keep people happy, not to solve problems, but actually I think it's certainly the lesser of two evils. I would rather that government didn't try to define marriage as opposed to defining it against reality.
Yeah, I'd ask you to actually look at it as a massive benefit to the church, because at the moment the rules around marriage not only are imposed on people that maybe the church don't agree with, but they're also imposed on the church. So there are rules and regulations around how marriages are conducted, what is said at the marriage, what the
solemnisation rules. Yeah,
all these sort of things may be adopted by the church, they may be kept by the church, but why are they imposed? Yeah. They're imposed on the church. So
here's the problem with your theory. And it's a good theory, but it is utopian. And where it's going to come unstuck in the real world is that the cultural Marxist agenda that is trying to unravel family itself won't be happy with the deregulation of marriage. What they actually want is the special protection and creation of a victim class. They want to see this struggle between empowered and unempowered people. And if you take away the definition of that, they're just going to pursue the same agenda some other way of trying to create gays versus straights. And I'm just not buying into that. I don't hate homosexuals. I don't have any ill will towards them at all. I see them exactly identical and valuable and equal to me.
Yep.
But this cultural Marxist agenda, which actually wants to, it's no longer the working class versus the capitalists. It's now the unempowered, the victims, the oppressed versus the rest of us. The white, middle-aged, married, Christian, cisgender, heteronormative male.
Yeah, no, and I can see that. I mean, there's definitely a push in control. There's a hard left group in our society that are using same-sex marriage as the thin edge of the wedge. But the weapon they're using is the government legislation. And I would say we can disarm them. The reason we can disarm that left by taking those regulatory tools away from them. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. It's not on the table. But I always preface my answer to your question with that imaginary position, which is
I don't
the
think it's
preferred
ludicrous.
position.
I think there's a lot of people.
Well, you know what? It's only the Marriage Act came in 1961, replaced a whole bunch of state legislation. most of that state legislation up until the late 50s allowed 12-year-old girls and 14-year-old boys to get married.
Really?
Yeah, it was legalised pedophilia. I mean, now it's another time, another place, but without that legislation, without those state-based marriage acts, it's very unlikely 12-year-old girls could be married off, because it would have come back to contract law. You need to be an age of consent to consent to a contract. It would have been illegal.
Now, let's talk about the political ramifications without the philosophical ramifications or theological.
So where we are now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, we'd probably just want to keep this to 2 to 3 minutes because of the length of segment being ideal. What about the fallout of the 1 in 3 marriages that are currently ending up in divorce? Does government-regulated marriage make it easier for government-regulated divorce, property settlements and family law?
I don't know whether I can keep this. My view on this is because
maybe this is another segment instead of 2 minutes.
This could be another segment, but the reason, look, my view is that regulated marriage is a one-size-fits-all marriage. It makes marriage unattractive to a lot of people. Right, so people that might otherwise want to get married, say using a prenuptial agreement, are prevented from doing so. It's a one-size-fits-all that doesn't fit everyone. So marriage, for a start, has lost popularity because it is a one-size-fit-all arrangement. Now, there's the Marriage Act, and then there's lots of family law and lots of other legislation around separation that also provides perverse incentives to break up families. Now, some of these are introduced because there are, well-meaning legislation, and some of them, you need a system of law in order to, when an agreement or a contract comes to an end and there's some dispute over the terms of the contract, being a marriage, there needs sometimes to be a mechanism in terms to sort all that out.
Yeah.
What we're saying, though, is, or what I would say, is that because it's one size fits all, it's more likely that it'll end in dispute because people haven't been able to sort out the terms and conditions up front that suit them best. I'm not sure whether that exactly answers your question or what you're looking for, but
look, it's definitely a big can of worms, that one. What do you think? We'd be interested in keeping up with the comments and the conversation going beneath this video so we can move on to another topic for the next segment. But keep the conversation going. What do you think? Should we abolish marriage altogether? What would make that become unworkable? Or why would that actually solve all our problems with one silver bullet? Keep it going, and we'll join in the comments at the bottom of this video when we can. Thanks for watching. If you really enjoyed that video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Have a look at this great video next, and check out the website for even more interesting articles and episodes later.